I'd like to call to order the City of Oak Harbor Planning Commission regular meeting, December 10, 2019. First item on the agenda is roll call. Let the record show that all commissioners are present except for Commissioner Phillip. At this time, I'd like to extend a greeting to our newest commissioner, Amy Malmkar. Welcome. I'm sure you will find this interesting at times. Yes. Second item on the agenda this evening is the approval of the minutes of November 26. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the November 26 regular business meeting minutes.
I have a motion.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion passes. The third item, as we do always, is the Planning Commission accepting public comment for items not otherwise on the agenda for the first 15 minutes of our meeting. Do I have any takers this evening? Seeing none, I will close that part of our meeting. Item 4, this is the public meetings for this evening. The first item is the 2020 Comprehensive Plan docket. This is a public meeting in accordance with the Oak Harbor Municipal Code Section 18.15.040. The city is initiating its annual comprehensive plan amendment process. Staff will present the draft 2020 docket to the Planning Commission. The 2020 docket will include continued work on the joint planning area, housing and economic development elements. The capital improvements plan will also be reviewed for annual updates. At this time, I would give to Senior Planner Kat Kamak for additional comments.
Thank you, Kat Kamak, Senior Planner. Here to present the 2020 Comprehensive Plan docket, at least the draft docket. So just for everybody's update or knowledge on the Comprehensive Plan amendment process, we have a process designed to amend the comprehensive plan because the GMA gives us only one chance per year to amend it. And so this is written into state law. So the city has designed a process by which we can kind of methodically address these changes every year. And so that's why we start this process at around October, November of the previous year. We advertise, put a notice in the newspaper, and invite the public to see if they have any changes that they would like to see in the comprehensive plan. We discuss the issues with Planning Commission and City Council. And throughout the year, we are kind of keeping our ears to all the decisions that have been made and to see if there are any changes warranted because of some changing circumstances in the community. So all of this kind of funnels to a docket that's adopted in March, and I'll go through a little a slide that includes the dates and the process for the adoption. So we process these amendments all year long, and when we get to the final, to the end of the year, we then make decisions on which ones we want to change, and then which ones get carried over, and which ones we don't want to make any changes. So all of these has occurred in the past. So for the 2020 docket, the items that we have tracking, we actually got an application from a property owner in the city that would like to change their designation on their property. So this is the property that's located on Northeast 16th Avenue. That's where the funeral home is. The property adjacent, just west of the funeral home, is a vacant piece of land. It's zoned for high-intensity commercial, and the property owner is considering wanting to put some residential units, maybe some 3-plexes and 4-plexes in there. They're backed on the south side by single-family residential homes, and on the west side also is low-density residential till you get to the highway, and then you have some multifamily. So there's some residential character in that area, so the applicant has recommended that the city consider the land use change. So that's an application we have in, and we'll be considering that in the early part of the year. Another land use change that we're anticipating reviewing this year is the Harbor Heights property. This is the 75-acre parcel that the city is in the process of acquiring, and this is located along Gun Club Road on the north end of town. And as you know, as you're well familiar with the Parks and Recreation Plan, it targets the northwest portion of the city for a community park. That's the area that the service is most lacking. So this property would kind of fit into that and be able to serve that area. It's a large parcel and has a lot of potential, but it's currently designated for planned business park, or industrial, I should say. And so the land use designation needs to be changed in order to receive the park amenities. So we'll have to consider that in 2020 as well. We update the capital improvements plan every year. This is the plan that lists all the projects that the city hopes to tackle in the next 6 years based on the funding that it has. We amend it every year. We add 1 year and take 1 year out. We just went through the process last meeting. So we'll do that again. And this year is going to be, in 2020, it's going to be kind of exciting because we'll have a new table that will consider the transportation benefit district dollars and the projects that need to be tackled with that. So we'll have to take a look at that and create a table and make sure we track those projects for that. So that will be one of the major additions to the capital improvement plan. As you know, the housing element is underway, kind of being updated. We've received a grant from Department of Commerce to tackle to get some help with this housing element update, maybe an implementation program of sorts. So we're currently in the process of drafting some kind of a RFP, RFQ to try and utilize that dollars. Also in the process of determining how we want to use that dollars. So all of that will happen again in 2020. And JPA UJ amendment, this is not necessarily a comprehensive plan amendment, at least not from, we don't have our JPA boundaries on the city's comprehensive plan map. It's kind of outside of our jurisdiction actually, and the state has said the county is responsible for doing that. But we've listed it in our comprehensive plan docket so that because it's a comprehensive plan amendment for the county, and we want to kind of track with them. So we have that listed as well, just to track. So these are the things that are moving forward. This is just to present the Planning Commission with what we have tracking. This is not the actual docket that you're going to recommend. We'll come to your next meeting where you'll hold a hearing on it, and we'll ask you for a recommendation. So no action is necessary at this time. We just wanted to bring this kind of FYI. So any questions, I'll be happy to answer. If not, we'll continue this at the next meeting.
Anyone have any comments, questions?
All right.
Thank you, Kat.
Thank you.
Second item on the agenda this evening is the Central Business District Code Review. It's also a public meeting. Staff will make a presentation on current and proposed land use permitted within the CBD zone district in response to a request by the Oak Harbor Main Street Association. This area is also the subject of pending moratorium on new development applications for mixed uses. Potential changes and future needs will be discussed. Associate Planner Ray Lindenberg, welcome.
Thank you. Members of the Planning Commission, I'm here to give you a brief presentation on the process for our Central Business District Code Review. This will be kind of an informative session for you, and if you do have any questions, please let me know as we go through it. And then we'll move through the process. I'll kind of give you an overview of what the future process will bring towards the end of the presentation as well. So the reason that we're here tonight, going to have problems with this again. There we go. The Main Street Association came to us with a set of design guidelines that also included some information on uses and other issues within the Central Business District. So based on that and some concern from the public and the City Council regarding some uses that were being proposed for the downtown area, we decided to go through and do a review of the Central Business District Code itself. Kind of at the same time, that moratorium that you mentioned came up. So we are going to fold those processes all together, do more of a comprehensive type review rather than just kind of doing Band-Aid approach with some of the issues that we have here. So with regard to the process, every time, there we go. We have the proposed guidelines that we got from the Main Street Association on the left-hand side there, and then we have the revised DRG document, Design Regulations and Guidelines, that we went through previously. And then to the bottom there is the zoning ordinance revision that we're discussing tonight. Sorry, Tim. Yeah, it's still not. Thank you. So this is a review tonight. We're not going to make any changes right away, but we are going to review the issues that we see within and be able to respond to that better. So we have 4 kind of main core issues that we've identified from the community, from the Main Street Association, and from our own staff discussion. First among those, and this is not in any particular order, but the first one we're going to talk about are the commercial uses that are allowed within the district. Second being mixed use and the definitions and standards for those uses. Residential uses in the district, and then balancing activity across the time and day. And that's kind of a concept I'll bring up towards the end that we can have a little discussion on. Oh, it worked for me and it didn't. Okay, so if you look at our code right now, we have 62 different permitted uses, 3 accessory permitted uses, and 12 conditional uses. That's a lot of uses. Here's a list. Feel free to read through that as you will. You will notice, maybe if you can see that there's a lot of R's after some of those uses. And what those R's refer to are retail type uses. When you go back to, now it's going the wrong way, sorry. That's me, that was my fault. When you go back to some of our kind of peer cities, the cities that we consider to be similar to the city of Oak Harbor, you see that there's a pattern there and everybody else has fewer uses. And that's probably because they don't have all of those different R uses that are specified within the code. So even, the next kind of on the list is 37 permitted uses. 5 of those are government uses, like a civic center and a city hall and a library, all very similar type things. A lot of the different codes that we see out there generalize a little bit to kind of cut down on that list and make it a little bit more flexible for people who are using it, the public, and make it easier for us as the city to be able to kind of identify what's going to fit into the community there. So going through and seeing the ones that are kind of the larger type there, I blew it up just a little bit, still tiny, but you have the ones that are with the R after them and then the ones that are grayed out. And if you can take those and remove the ones that are all R and just say retail uses, that cuts us down to 31 permitted uses right there. So we feel that that might be a good way to kind of streamline the process a little bit. People come in and they say, hey, I want to do this retail use in the downtown area. We can say, yes, you can do that, instead of having to say, well, this is similar to, and try and figure out how we categorize it. And I know the concern is going to be, well, what about kind of the appropriate uses in the downtown area, like marijuana shops or sexually oriented businesses or things like that? Well, those are all addressed in other places in the code. So we don't feel that that's too much of a concern, because those kind of uses that you might not want to see in the downtown area are pretty much addressed in other parts of the code. So the simplification for the ease of use and understanding, as I mentioned, it makes it easier for staff to be able to take a phone call or a visit, a walk-in from somebody who says, I want to operate a retail succulent store, and we say, okay, you can sell those because it's a retail use. Whereas if we had to figure out, well, that's kind of like a nursery, but does that fit in? And trying to figure out all those things makes it a little bit more difficult and a little bit more of a situation where it's kind of like the monolith of the city when people come in and say, well, may I please, kind of thing. So we want to make it a little bit more streamlined. We want to make it more user-friendly for everybody involved. So we have retail uses combined and outdated modes eliminated, and we'll talk about that in just a second. And we have this philosophical change between the very specific uses and the more broad and generalized categories. And as I mentioned previously, those inappropriate specific uses are addressed in other places within our code. So one of the other concepts that we have for that use list, still at 31 uses, could be trimmed further possibly if that's something that is of interest, is the recategorization of some of those other uses, making services fit together. There's specific uses in there that talks about travel agencies and other types of, photo studios and things like that. as services, are we okay with seeing that in the downtown area? And I would say that we probably are. So maybe we just consider that as a professional service and we put that in as a category. Or maybe we don't. Maybe we stay specific with those. That's something that we can open up to discussion. And as we move through this process, the public input and input from the Planning Commission, City Council, Main Street Association, trying to figure out what the good balance is there. And then having an entertainment category perhaps that includes your billiard halls and your brew pubs and your restaurants that are open late, a movie theater, things like that. That kind of fit into a use category rather than being very specific. And then just an example of removing an outdated use, we have blueprinting in there. And I can't remember the last time I saw a place that did blueprinting. So that's something that could probably be removed. Okay, so we have mixed use definitions and standards. If you ask people what a mixed use building is, most people have kind of a similar idea. It's a building that has multiple different uses within it. There has been some concern about what development happens within the downtown area and how we define mixed uses. And so what we did as staff is went and researched our peer cities and kind of went outside that bubble even a little bit to find out what the consensus is on what a mixed use building is. And so by going through all of these, you're going to notice a pattern. I don't expect you to read those, and I'm not going to read them to you, but there is a definite pattern there that says pretty much a mixed-use building is a building that has a mix of either residential, retail, commercial, office, et cetera. Typically, things are utilized or allowed within the zone district. So we went through our peer cities again, Mount Vernon, Port Angeles, Port Townsend, and then we also went outside into the wider world, if you will. Portland, Oregon, Salt Lake City, Flagstaff, Arizona, and Denver, Hot Springs, Arkansas. We kind of just went out there, and the thing that we did notice, and the issue that we're kind of seeing is that there is nowhere in any of these definitions, and I looked up probably 50 or so, that says that there should be a percentage or a square footage of mixed use, ratio of commercial versus residential or office versus commercial or whatever it is. And I believe that there's a reason for that, and I think that reason is that it reduces the creativity and the flexibility that goes into the development of projects, within downtown areas. And quite simply, it might not pencil for the developer. If we have a minimum square footage for something, maybe that doesn't work for the developer. And the unintended consequences of providing too much commercial space. If we have a situation, I don't know who remembers the project on Bayshore that came up before us in about 2007. That one had about 110 residential units and approximately 25,000 square feet, 22,000 square feet of commercial when it first came in. If we were to require, say, the 33% that's on the moratorium now of commercial square footage, 33% of that total area, and assume that your 110 units are about 1,000 square feet each, that would require about 36,000 square feet of commercial space. Now, what happened with the Fleming project, the Bayshore project, was when it first came in, it had over 20,000 square feet in, but by the time it went through the SEPA process, it had gone down to about 15,000 square feet. And so the concern that we have as staff is that if we have this set number, the requirement for a percentage or a square footage or a dimension, that we might miss out on projects that we don't even know about, that some savvy developer might come in, take a look at our code and say, well, we clearly can't meet that, and they'll even come in and talk to us. So that's our concern, is we want to remain flexible. We want to remain open to the idea of having developments come in and then allowing those to essentially be submitted to us so that we can review them rather than just kind of holding them out without any kind of review at all. So the next issue of being the residential uses within the district. And I think that if you were to look at, kind of urban planning literature, is the consensus there is residential uses are needed and a necessary thing in your downtown areas to drive traffic to your commercial businesses, to make it so that there's less traffic, to allow older folks who maybe can't drive anymore to access services and things like that. And so this is one of those kind of I don't want to say nebulous, but it's a concept out there that we don't have a standard for right now. We know that residential uses drive business in downtown areas, and we will bring more research to you all to explain that, and when we get into a public forum with that, we will kind of explain more of that information, but we just want to put that out there, that the concept of having residences within the downtown area is something we want to stick with. And so that's going to be kind of a key component of this review as well. And then finally, I want to talk about balancing activity across the time and day. And we had this kind of briefly when I spoke about the design guidelines a while back, but I want to expand on it and flesh out my thoughts a little bit on this because I think it's important. What we have is when you have a residential project in a downtown area or anywhere really, you have these kind of activity times, right? You have more activity on the weekends and then more activity in the morning and in the evening for your residential areas. And then the lesser activity times are shown in that kind of lighter green. When we have office buildings and offices, you generally have office hours. So you have that kind of 8 to 5, 8 to 6, somewhere thereabouts, and then clears out, right? For retail, generally, especially in our downtown area, you have that kind of retail hours, 9 a.m. to 6, 9 to 5, 10 to 5, et cetera. During the week, sometimes those businesses are closed on Sundays or Mondays, and so that kind of narrows it down a little bit more. But when you add the office and retail together, you come up with greater activity during the midday hours. When you add the office, retail, and residential together, you start to get more activity throughout the day. And then you throw in the wild card, and I brought it up a little bit earlier, that entertainment category. If you have a restaurant that caters to evening, dinner time, or if you have that brew pub, or if you have that activity in movie theater, et cetera, then that starts to draw out the activity to more hours. I'm not saying we want to be Las Vegas and be 24 hours a day. That's not the case. This at least brings in more traffic and brings in that activity. And the key thing is here is our comp plan and our zoning code both mention vibrant downtown. This is what we're looking for, is activity. And so that first category, that residential category, is kind of the key because it boxes everything in. So going back to those core issues again, we're going to talk about commercial uses allowed in the district. And this is one of those things that when we bring it up to our public open house, we're probably just going to have a list there and we're going to see what people think about that. We're going to say, hey, do you find this list to be easier? Do you find this shorter list to be easier? I know what I'd pick, but I want everybody else to tell me what they think as well. We have the mixed use definitions and standards, and we really want to dig down deep into this one because this is important. We know that there have been controversy within the community about what mixed uses are and what's appropriate for the downtown. So we're going to be very serious about this and really get into it. The residential uses in the district, what is appropriate for our downtown? How much is appropriate? How much do we need? What can the market bear and what will the market bring to us? And then the concept finally of balancing activity across the time and day. Again, we don't want to be Vegas, but it would be nice to not have the downtown roll up the sidewalks at 5 or 6 p.m. and become a ghost town. We want to have that activity and we want people to want to come downtown who already live here or maybe visiting from out of town. So based on those things, our process is going to be as follows. We have our Planning Commission discussion right now. That's step number 1. We're going to go back and develop some of these concepts a little bit more, flesh them out, and then we're going to present them in a public open house within the next month and a half. And then after that, we'll get some concepts, we'll get some ideas, we'll get comments from the public. We'll bring in our stakeholders, the community itself, the Main Street Association, our property owners downtown, and then we'll bring it back to you for further review and discussion and see if we are ready to go with a draft that changes some things or keeps some things the same. We'll see what we need to do with that. And then after that, after you've had a chance to take a look at it and comment on it, then we'll be going to the City Council for an adoption.
The moratorium, did it come with a time like 6 months?
It did.
9 months, a year?
It does, and under state law, we have the ability, or the council has the ability to extend that timeframe. If we go to the council and ask them to extend the timeframe, then the law says that what we have to do is basically have a plan, a schedule for how we would use the additional time. We've done that before on other moratoriums. I don't think we're afraid of that on this particular one. The balancing part of that is that you don't want it to go on too long because then it's viewed as just a de facto prohibition, and then you got to deal with it in a different fashion. But if collectively we don't think we're at the place where we're ready to complete the work before the time frame expires, we go to the council and we lay out what we need from them.
Thank you.
Does this process have to be finished, this process here, by the end of that moratorium?
It does not. We have the ability to extend the
But I
moratorium
mean,
if necessary.
If we don't want to extend, does it have to be done by
Then
then?
it,
Yes, then
Yeah.
it would be.
Which is when?
I don't have that date in
We're
my
like
head.
halfway through, right?
We are,
Yeah.
we are. And to be honest, had we not had such a push on some of our current development things, we would have had this conversation probably last month.
Was it 6 months or a year?
It's 6 months.
Well, it
And
started
and
in
the
August.
first 6-month extension is pretty easy.
Oh, okay,
People start to get nervous, people meaning city
Yeah.
attorneys, start to get nervous after you go past a year.
Yeah.
We've done that one other time in my history here. So realistically, I expect, given the interest in this topic, and I think that everybody's desire to do a great job with it, I would expect that we'll end up asking for an extension, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Just real quick, as long as I have the floor, so to speak, Ray and Sarah, I'd like to have you send the PowerPoint out to the planning commissioners so that you can read the fine print that you couldn't read from your chairs. And that way you may want to be able to scribble some notes on it as you get ready for our next conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
What's the typical format for the public open house?
you know,
Is there a typical?
I don't know that there is. I did a open house when we did our temporary sign code, and pretty much we just literally opened up this room. We had some poster boards up that talked about different concepts and ideas. And, you know, it's about gathering information from the public, so we would make it as interactive as possible to allow people to kind of see what's existing and what some of our ideas are and things like that, but also to solicit other ideas. We're not, you know, locked into one thing, so there's lots of creative people out there that can help us out.
Sometimes with an open house, you start with some sort of brief presentation to try to get everybody at the same starting point, and then you sort of break up and you just let everybody roam around and do it, and engage in conversation. Other times you don't have that initial presentation, and you try to help people get the information they need through handouts or other things, and they can just come and go as they please. So we haven't worked out those details. If you folks have ideas as to how you think that would be most productive, we would, you know, obviously greatly appreciate that.
I think it'd be worth looking at both the transportation and Windjammer Park. I think you also did virtual open houses on them, and it'd be interesting to see what the participation was in the real life one versus the online one, and whether there is enough to make it worthwhile to invest in that for this too.
Yeah.
Good point, good point. Just the transportation plan, I think we had a very successful in-person open house,
We
I
did.
recall. We
Yeah.
had a lot of good participation, but I think that was also because we'd gotten enough information out in advance that people felt comfortable in coming and having some base level of knowledge that then they could engage in the conversation.
Yeah, is now a moment that I can give this
Absolutely.
thought. I was at one of the county's public open houses, and it was meant to be very engaging, but I realized there that I knew nothing about what the county was, what the struggles were. I didn't know enough about how city government worked to even, you know, put my little dot vote on the board that they, you know, I enjoyed being able to participate, but I felt very ignorant. So I think that concept of putting something at the beginning, of getting people on the same page so that they're informed about what the struggles are, was really
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, definitely.
A couple of things. One, just to talk about the residential real quick. You know, I don't, in all the conversations I've had with people and going to those hearings about Lehigh, I don't think anybody really had an issue with residential in the CBD. I think it was always residential on the ground floor facing Pioneer. And that kind of gets to the next thing, which is when we start talking about CBD versus CBD1 and CBD2, it gets a little bit confusing because a lot of people think CBD and they're thinking, okay, the whole central business district, including areas 1 and 2. Maybe we want to redesignate CBD, like CBD0, CBD1, and CBD2, so that we can specify when we're talking about CBD, we're talking about Pioneer only, and the lots that are facing Pioneer. Is that what you're talking about here?
That is certainly a possibility. We are taking a look at the entire CBD, which includes
One and
CBD
two.
and CBD 1 and 2. So that is certainly a possibility, and it's something we've talked about as staff before, the idea of designating certain streets as being special, if you will, for, requirements for ground floor commercial and things like that. That's definitely a possibility. But doing CBD 0 actually sounds like a great idea as well. Yeah.
So, along those lines, one of the concepts that was more ingrained in our code and our policies and regulations a good number of years ago, that isn't there as much now, that maybe is something that should be revisited, is the idea of designating pedestrian streets or primary pedestrian oriented street, and then building different regulations and policies around that concept, so that you might say to yourself, Pioneer is the primary pedestrian street for us. It may not be the only one, but that not every street within the greater central business district area, we may not have the same expectations as a community on some of those other streets. And so our conversations at the staff level have had all sorts of these layers, Hal, that you're talking about. Do we treat 1 and 2 separately? Are they still part of this conversation, or do we just set them aside and say, gosh, that's probably working okay? The real focus is for all of those lots which front onto Pioneer. That's the community's primary concern, and all the rest of these are ancillary concerns. We think at the staff that all of these things are on the table right now.
Yeah, that really brings up an interesting point, because if you look at the CBD right now, Barrington is at the north end of the CBD, right? But that's mainly services, really. It's the city hall and the police station and a few other things. And Bayshore is largely residential, but not exclusively. And so, yeah, I think that, if we define what our goal is, what is our goal in making any changes, if we're going to make them to this code? Is our goal to put feet on the street, 15 hours a day? Well, then certainly just putting residential on the ground floor is not going to do that. Those people are going to be gone all day.
All of those things, I think, really factor into this. And some of the research that Ray mentioned to you that we're going to bring to you at a different time centers around the concept of revitalization of downtowns. There's a ton of information out there about smaller communities and larger communities, but obviously we're focusing on the smaller ones, about revitalization and what are the primary 10 or 12 steps that most are viewed as these are the key steps to revitalization. And housing, of course, is one of them, and mixed uses are one of them. How and where they occur, what are the relationships between them, those are all really integral parts to answering these questions. And we're going to start with the comprehensive plan, because we're planners and we don't know what else to do. But it also gives us good direction, right? And so layers, I think, is a great way to think about this. There are lots of layers to this particular planning problem, and we're ready to peel back as many as Planning Commission and Council and the community want to.
So another concern when we were talking specifically about Lehigh, there was a lot of talk about the issue of lot frontages, boundary line adjustments to make essentially unusable lots. Is that going to come into this review also, where you can say, okay, the minimum lot has got to have a 30-foot frontage and 50-foot depth, or whatever the numbers are that you come up with?
Right. The thing we've talked about as staff is the concept of, for boundary line adjustments or creation of new lots, is to have a standard, right? So the issue that we have there is what is quote unquote a buildable lot. And so that's something that we'll be taking a look at. That is part of the CBD code. You know, it talks about density and minimum lot sizes, so we will take a look at that as well, and I think it's important to include as part of a comprehensive review of the code of the
But
zone
it's
district.
not just what is a buildable lot, because, you know, anything's buildable, right? There's 8-foot wide houses in some urban districts. We don't necessarily want to have an 8-foot wide property. We need to
challenge-
decide what character do we want for our city.
Sure.
Absolutely. I think on one of the slides Ray had with the phrase unintended consequences. And that's lot sizes is one of the areas that I think we have the greatest possibility for unintended consequences. And so we'll have to collectively think our way through, are we creating challenges for property owners, and we have to be cognizant of property rights, if we institute a minimum lot size. Now, our early concept is you can set it and say, this is the minimum lot size from this point going forward for all newly created lots. And so then hopefully we're not eliminating any private property rights for the people who want to develop on their lots the way that they are. If they wish to change the configuration of those lots, then they have to live by the new rules. That's a pretty common way of doing it. But what is that? Is there a magic lot size? If you look at old downtowns, you're going to see the same kind of lot pattern that we have, which is just a helter-skelter of all sorts of things. Some of them are, 33 by 100 or 50 by 100 is not uncommon to see. But that one, I would suggest we have to be really careful so that we don't create a situation where we're trampling on somebody's rights.
But I think we can all pretty much agree that we don't want a lot that's 270 foot of frontage and 15 feet deep, again, which is what we ended up with.
Yep.
Is there somewhere within this plan and system that states a vision or a culture? Because you say, revitalized, well, to a 32-year-old, that might look different to the 62-year-old. Is there any more definition of what that vision is?
The vision comes mostly from our comprehensive plan, and that's something that we reviewed a couple of years ago and renewed a couple of years ago. So it's, they're all living documents.
Yeah.
So it really depends, and that's why we want to get as much of the public in here as possible.
Yeah.
So we can all say, hey, what does the 32-year-old think? What does the 62-year-old think? And everywhere in between, and older and younger. Because it's the communities downtown, right? It's not one person or one group. It's the cities downtown, and so that's something that we want to really get out there. Is look, this is our future. Let's be serious about it and really get creative and see what we can do. So
Can I add on to that, Ray?
Yeah.
So to add on to the vision, I think you can really see in 3 different layers. The top one is the comprehensive plan, right? It has a narrative that describes what the community's expectations are for the central business district. We hope that vision is implemented by the zoning code and the regulations, but in some ways it may not be. It may not have kept pace with the community vision. And then sort of the third piece of that are the design guidelines that we've just recently updated, because that's what drives how that combination of uses and activities looks when we're on the street. So I would suggest that each of those pieces has a part of the overall vision, but in all seriousness, the starting place is the comprehensive plan. And if that's not yielding what we want, then we're going to jump into CAC's process with the comp plan and talk about amending those words so that those words better reflect what the community wants. Now, we haven't heard anything in this past year that tells us that the comp plan words are missing the mark somewhere. I think what we've heard loud and clear is that maybe the standards within the zoning code aren't necessarily up to the task of meeting that vision, and then that the design guidelines, the embodiment of it, isn't yielding the product that we're looking for.
Yeah, and I think it's important to, moving forward with this part for the CBD, that we get maximum input for the people who work and invest and live in the central business district. So, and I know they've been super involved up to now, and I just, going forward, it's going to be important to hear from them.
We're going to make sure that to the best of our ability, we have a good cross-section of everybody who wants to be involved, right? And I know that we have representatives from Main Street this evening. They may want to share some thoughts with the commission, so when Ray is done, that would be great. And as Ray mentioned, we want to try to engage property owners and other organizations, as well as citizens from places other than the central business district, because it is the community's central business district, but some people live and work and use it more often than others, right? And we don't want anybody to be left out of this process, really.
Oh, yes, I'd be happy to go. So Ray, you'd said in talking about mixed uses that your review of the code indicated there really wasn't any places where they were specifying particular percentages of this use or that use, and that your concern was that by doing that you might miss out on projects.
Yes.
Which seems fair. But it seems to me that we have a model already in place on the residential side with the the PRDs that has specifications, and we can permit variances from that. And if we had something in this code, but some PRD-like mechanism where we could grant variances, then we can kind of put forward, here's what we expect out of mixed uses, and we're willing to consider some variances from those, but it kind of guides that, and I think that might alleviate your missed project problem, because we certainly have had, maybe I'm overreading it because it's awfully fresh, but we've had plenty of variances in the PRDs that we reviewed over the past couple of months. Those projects weren't deterred by the existing code.
This is true, and I'll point out variations, not variances.
Oh.
Yeah, and
Nuts, I had
the
that
thing
one
is,
right.
I think there was a lot of concern about the number of variations, and for whatever reason, there's concern for that, and I get it. At the same time, I feel like when you look at the larger body of work, if you will, of these other cities that have gone through and worked through the process, and you see, small towns, huge metropolitan areas, and they're all have that one thing in common, that there is not a number in there. That, to me, as a planner, tells me that it's working that way. And I think it can work that way, because when I think about, I think about two specific parcels right now that are kind of eligible for this. And one is the corner on Dock Street there, where the gravel is and the picnic tables. And the other is, the big Bayshore property. And the thing is about the Bayshore property, as I briefly touched on, 110 units, 110,000 square feet of residential multiplied by 0.33. Say that's the number that we use. That gives us 36,000 square feet of commercial space, which is about the size of Hagen's. And if you were to dump 36,000 square feet of commercial space onto our commercial real estate market at one time, that's going to have long-term effects.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the concern, is when you start setting absolute numbers, that we have that issue. And then if you start setting absolute numbers with outs, a way out of it, then you start getting people who complain, well, there's too many variations here, or whatever it is. And so it's a tough one, it's a tough one to figure out what exactly the right balance is. But at the same time, I look at, these other places that have a long history of utilizing this terminology of mixed use, and I see that they don't have those numbers in there. It kind of tells me that I don't think we need it, and it seems kind of like a bad idea. But, we are certainly open to creative solutions and other ways of looking at things, so.
Sure.
And part of it too is looking at, what you want to see downtown, what's the form you want to see. It's kind of, there's a lot about uses, but it's also about what it looks like, right? So,
Well,
if-
doesn't allowing that non-defined percentages allows for the course of time, 10 years, right now we have a vision of what we want this downtown to look like, but in another 15, 20 years, that could be highly different, and then you'd have to change code again to change your percentages.
Yeah, and I think the key thing is, and Steve brought it up, the idea of, property rights, and, You know, we don't want to trample on property rights, and we also want to allow the market to decide some of these things, you know, because they're the experts, you know, the real estate people and the market people are the experts. I can't sit here and say, well, we need, you know, X number of square feet of residential or how many units or whatever. I can't do that. Whereas the market decides, if you will. And I think that allowance for flexibility now in 2019 or 15, 20 years down the road is important.
Fair enough. And then just one other thing, you were talking about balancing activity across times of day. I don't have a brief either direction, but why don't we want downtown to roll up its sidewalks at 5 or 6 o'clock? I mean, that's kind of an assumption, and I'm not sure
Okay,
if we
and
have a basis for it.
That's a fair point. That is an assumption. That's an assumption on my part. That's not the vision I would have for downtown.
That was part of my question with
Yeah.
our vision statement is,
Except I would respectfully submit that since the comprehensive plan talks about a vibrant downtown, that probably means something more than the 9 to 5. Because I think it is, you know, the description is it's our social center, our traditional social center, and there's some other words in there, which probably denotes something other than the business day. But it is an interesting problem, because I can tell you, as from a long-term perspective of viewing what's happened in the downtown, we've, on one hand, we have meetings like this, and we have planning documents, and we have visions, and we say this is where we're sort of headed. But when we have something in the downtown that is more active than normal, it often causes conflict and friction between the residents that we have in a downtown, right? And
That is
so-
what was crossing my mind.
so, I mean, but like many things, right, we don't have 100% buy-in,
Yeah.
right? We might have buy-in to the concept, we may not necessarily have buy-in to the implementation of the concept. And I think that's going to come to the surface in this conversation. If I could add one other thing, and it kind of relates to something that Ray was talking about, and to your point, Alan, I think as well, is a lot of the codes that we've been looking at really in their downtowns, whether they do it elsewhere or not, they've kind of gone to this form-based code concept, which doesn't focus so much on this use is okay at this location, subject to these kinds of things. What it does is, and forgive me if you're familiar with this already, is it says we're not going to worry so much about the uses in the box. What we're going to worry about is what does that box look like? And how does it relate to the rest of the boxes along the street? And how does it relate to the street? And how does it relate to the people? So you might have a mix of uses that you wouldn't think in there, but as long as the interaction portion of it, the facades and the architectural details, as long as those are achieving the vision of what you want in your community, you don't have to worry so much about what is inside of the box or the mixture inside of the box. Typically, those are fairly complex codes to implement, and our collective wisdom, if you will, at the staff level is we're nowhere near wanting to try to do that for the whole community. That would be just turning the code upside down. But maybe some components of that would be helpful in the downtown. I mean, I look at Chelan is an example of a small community code that has a lot of detail into it when it talks about their historic downtown. And lots of little sub-districts, how they have probably CBD 1 through 22. I mean, they got a lot of things going on, right? That sometimes are just a few blocks long. But they have different standards that apply and how those interact with each other. That might be a way that we can address the questions that you're raising, the questions that Main Street has asked us to consider, and the questions that the council has asked us to consider. That might be a tool.
Okay. That's all I've got.
And I think, sorry, to clarify something, my vision of downtown informed by what our comprehensive plan says. Because, you know, when you read that, it does talk about vibrancy and center of social and economic activity and things like that. So that's within what we're processing in our minds right now.
Okay, thanks, Ray.
Yep.
All good?
Would the folks from Main Street like to add in?
Hello, everyone. My name is Dan Evans. I'm the president of the board for Main Street. I had about 45 minutes worth of comments, but between Hal, Amy, and Steve, you guys pretty much took all my good points, so good job. But the biggest one is vision. You know, when I first moved here 4 years ago, we pulled into this town after visiting literally every single town that was 25,000 people or less between Canada and Oregon, and this was the first one that my 4 daughters all said, yes. And it was because of how beautiful it is. We've got one of the most beautiful locations in the country that I've ever been to, and I get to live here. So do all of you. And one of the struggles that we have downtown is we don't have an identity. We don't know, what are we trying to accomplish? Are we going to be a tourist destination? Are we going to be the small mom and pop shops just for our local community to consume? Are we going to be a residential and economic center? What are we? We haven't identified that yet as a community, and I think we need to before we start putting the rules in place of how we're going to govern that. In regards to business hours, you know, that's one thing that comes up a lot in the comments that we get from the public of why they don't go downtown. Well, they work. They don't get off until 5 o'clock, and then everybody's closed. But on the businesses side, why would they stay open if nobody's coming downtown? We had a very informative meeting last week where we had the Main Street director for the state came into town, and we also had one of the best urban planners in the country join us, and we had some conversations about what makes a downtown happen. And a lot of those things come to the types of businesses that we attract. The only way that we're going to attract those businesses is by having an identity and a clear mission of where we're going. You know, when I look at my 4 daughters and they say, where do you guys want to go this weekend? They've never chosen a town that doesn't have an identity. Leavenworth, they can't wait to go to Leavenworth. You know, that place has got an identity. They have rules in place, but they have leniency as well, as long as you follow those few rules that make that place a destination. We've got over 3 million cars that visit this bridge 9 miles from us. How are we going to get them here? Because if we can get them here, man, the potential that we have for our area is phenomenal. And I hope you guys will be able to, you know, take that into consideration while we're going through all these changes of what are we going to accomplish. And how, I mean, you said it clear as day. We need to know where the heck we're going. And vision. And you guys continuously repeated the things that we were all talking about. That's what we were laughing about over here, was you guys are taking everything away from my comments. So bottom line, we're here to help you guys any possible way that we can. We want to be as involved in this process as we can, because the downtown is, well, it's everything we got, and we want to make sure that it works. So any questions for us from Main Street?
I don't have a question, I just make a comment. City of San Diego used to have a place called the Gaslight District. It was the slums, back street, away from the big malls and all that. And they came together, and they're doing exactly what you're talking about doing now. But they started small, okay, and each one of these, and everybody was kind of, the investors were kind of standing back and say, okay, it's a mixed use, okay, restaurants, commercial, whatever, on the bottom floor, and then they had 7 to 11 stories of residential. They all worked in the general area, the retail markets, and sooner than later, as that first one opened, and they saw how vibrant and where the people were coming from, the next one opened. And I'm not talking about very large properties either. I mean, tall, yes, but it was amazing, you know, one restaurant with an outside dining area that now they've got, you know, 50 people living upstairs. They don't want to, they come home. Now, these were not very large apartments or condos, and most of them were condos. But they met the criteria where if people came home from a long day, I don't really feel like fixing dinner, and I go downstairs, okay? Have a glass of wine, have a nice meal. Spend it right there. Next thing you know, this place, it's called the Gaslight District in San Diego. Look at it. Because it's unbelievable what they did in a very short period of time.
Yeah, if you've got people living down there, it makes a heck of a difference.
It's, I mean, as a planner at that time, you know, we took the train down there to look and spend the day. And we were just amazed at what we saw. It wasn't just the condos and things, but they were also addressing things like SROs. Okay, they had a number of buildings that were doing that. which is another important factor. And an SRO, they're gonna come downstairs anyway and eat. Or they're
Right.
gonna do their shopping because they don't have a whole lot of space. And so it really was intriguing to see and to watch it develop to what it is right now.
When it changes the challenge. Right now, our challenge is to get people to come downtown. There, the challenge is, come to my business, not his, because they're gonna be there anyways.
Yeah.
That's a challenge I would love to enjoy here in Oak Harbor. Any other comments or questions?
Does the Main Street Association have a preferred vision out of the ones that you, mentioned tourist destination, blah, blah, blah?
That's part of the reason that we actually had that meeting, because we've got a board of 10 people, and the vision was not clear, and we wanted to figure out what the best path to get to that vision is. So that's actually something that we're working on over the next couple months with our board to identify exactly what that is, and working with city council to get us down that path. But right now, we're walking blind.
And your organization is primarily business owners from downtown, correct?
That is correct. Anything else? Thank you, guys. I really appreciate your
Thank
time,
you,
and I
Dan.
really appreciate you guys sitting up there.
Appreciate
You bet.
it. Any other? I have a ditto from the audience.
So I'll volunteer to do a field trip to San Diego, subject to Mr. Obern's approval, of course. As soon as you give me pointed in the right direction, I'll go down there and
I
check it
did
out.
have a follow-on question for Ray. With that potential reduction in, help me out,
The big list of uses.
the big list,
Yes.
uses, there we go. Obviously, from just a public consumption, it's easier to understand. Is there any of the paperwork processes that is also becomes more efficient on city side, or does that pretty much stay the same?
Not necessarily. I don't think it really changes too much on our side, other than
How
relaying
you
information
communicate to the public.
to the public, yeah.
And I think one other, and Ray was kind of on that topic, but if you're a business owner or you want to start a brand new business and you come to us and you say, I want to sell X, and we say, well, gosh, we have this list of 62 things, it's not really in there, but we'll figure out whether it works. We may already create a shadow of doubt in your mind as to whether or not we're going to say yes. And you may also worry, well, if we say yes, will it always be yes? Whereas if the use list just says retail, and clearly what you're doing is retail, we may instill in you a peace of mind that gives you the ability to go forward with the project. So while it may not actually simplify our paperwork any, it might simplify life for the user. Yeah.
Could I make one more comment? I actually received a text message from somebody that's watching this online right now, and they brought up a PBD, which is similar to a PRD, but it's a planned business district. Something we can look at. I don't know. Sure. What you guys know about that, but I just wanted to bring that up.
Another acronym.
Fantastic. We'll add it to the list.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I don't see real estate office up there, and I know that there's 3 of them in the central business district, so.
Yeah, those are going to become non-conforming uses just as soon as we can get this squared away.
I'm sure Camden wouldn't have spent all that money on that new building if he'd known that.
Anything,
That's next on the list, yeah.
anything else for Ray?
Services.
Services, that would be real estate. That's a lump. You lumped it. So if that's it for that, I guess we need to talk about the next meeting, which is January 28, 2020, in the year 2020. I can't believe we're there. I, along with my fellow commissioners, probably would, at this time, like to wish staff and all the happiest of holidays.
Absolutely.
With that, the meeting is adjourned.